All right, if you would really quickly open that file up in Photoshop. I'm going to go into C1 Pro. I can actually open it directly from here. If you're working back and forth between both of these programs, you can simply take the file in C1 Pro and you can actually drag it on top of Photoshop and it will open a copy of it up into Camera Raw. So our first move in this is to actually color correct this guy. So again, it's the white balance tool, the third one over from the top. You click on this, you come over and we click on that patch, the gray patch right next to the red. That color neutralizes this out. I am set up to open this up as a smart object. If this reads open image for you, you can hold down the shift key and it will change to the opposite. So again, open this up as a smart object. It comes open into Photoshop. And then again, you guys, if you look at your action palette and your actions palette, do you guys have a 0 selective color action built already? They include one with the image? Okay, so they didn't include one in the image. That's fine. We'll build it really quick. So again, over to the adjustment layer menus at the bottom of the layers palette. The first thing we're going to do is add a hue saturation layer on top of that. Going right back to the same place, we are going to add a selective color. In selective color, we are going to drag every single color. The black value, we are going to drag all the way to the right. So for the reds, all the way to the right. For the yellows, all the way to the right. For the greens, all the way to the right. For the blue cyans, all the way to the right. For the blues, all the way to the right. For the magentas, all the way to the right. For the whites, all the way to the right. For the neutrals, all the way to the right. And finally for the blacks, all the way to the right. If you have an image that looks solarized like this, it's because you have the wrong radio button at the bottom picked. You need to have absolute, not relative, picked. And then you need to go back to the greens and grab that black slider and go all the way to the left. That is now flooding this green background with white ink. And then finally, click on the hue saturation value that's underneath it. We need to saturate this green to make it closer to a pure green. So in order to do that, I've just clicked to activate the saturation layer. Come up, click on the targeting adjustment tool. It's this little guy up here. Click and drag this to the right, and you'll actually start opening this up. And you'll see what's actually interesting about this, what's actually happening on this. It did pick the greens to target that, but we were really pretty successful in the greens already. So the move that we're making here with hue saturation is actually giving me a worse result than without this thing altogether. I've got a relatively black mask of her right here, and I've got a relatively light screen right here. So I'm not going to use this hue saturation slider at all. It contaminates the whole body mask here. This is not helping me. This is only hurting me. So again, I'm going to stick with using just the selective color one. I'm going to double click on the hand to kick back out. Then I am going to make a copy of this. So I'm going to load the RGB channel as a selection. I'm simply going to hold down the command key and click on it. That loads it as a selection. You will get this warning all the time when you do this, that no more than 50% of these pixels were selected. All that is saying is that you're not going to see the marching ants. That's all this thing really means. It is loading it as a selection, but you don't get the marching ants. So go ahead and say OK to that, and then go up to the select menu down to Save Selection and title it Knockout 1. And say OK. And you'll see down at the bottom that indeed you do have this thing called Knockout 1 that looks just like that image should look. Your selective color and hue saturation layer have done their job. You can throw both of those away. You don't need those anymore. We need to then select the knockout layer to do some refining work on it. And this was what I was talking to you guys about. As far as our knockout goes, we're only concerned with this edge right here. I'm not really concerned with what's going on out here or way over here. I'm just concerned where the background meets the body. So I'm going to zoom into this guy and see what it is I've actually got going on here. I can see that there's a little bit of detail right in here. There's something in Haley's shirt, something that's showing up in here. There's actually some right down here at the bottom. Even more so right down here. I'm going to go after this guy right down here. It's a shadow by her pants leg. I might as well, because I'm going to run levels on this, I might as well go ahead and get it to clean the black up of this, of her body as well. So I'm going to put a color sampler point on that. So again, drop down menu by the eyedroppers down to the third eyedropper down, grab the color sampler tool, and I'm going to drop one right here on the right part of her leg. And then I'm going to simply move just out into the background and drop another color sampler point out in the background. I've got my 2 readouts right now up here in my info palette. I'm going to change them to give me RGB readouts as opposed to K. So I'm going to select on the eyedropper number 1, just actually click on the eyedropper and come down and say, give me RGB color readout. And then I'm going to do the exact same thing for point number 2 and ask for RGB color readout. I'm going to hit Command L to bring up the levels dialog box. And I'm going to go after my black point first. I'm reading 7s in my info palette. You guys should be somewhat close to that. So I'm simply going to take the black point and drag it so it starts to come up. Oh, this is interesting. Look at what's going on right here. I have got no histogram in here at all. And as I'm starting to drag this guy, it's not changing a whole lot for me either. Does anybody have any idea what's going on? What's wrong? I still have an active selection going, and you can't see the marching ants. So that's why you get that warning. So I'm going to cancel out of levels here really quick and hit Command D so I do not have an active selection going, and then Command L again. And now when you see your dialog box open up, you see that you do have a histogram in it. And now when we start to drag these sliders, these values right here will change. So again, I'm going to select. And for the most part, I've selected black point. I'm already so close to it. I'm just going to use the arrow keys to get that to 0. And then I'm going to go after the white point slider and start to pull it back till, again, I get close to that 255. Wow, I cannot believe it's got to come back that much. But nonetheless, can that really be true? Say what? I'm going to check and see what's going on in here. Yeah, that feels like a pretty ragged edge for me that I feel like I'm picking up in here. I cannot believe that this is not better than this is. Well, I'm going to stick with this like it is here, but I'm not going all the way. So I came back on my, oh wait, guys, no wonder. I'm not pulling the white point slider. I'm pulling the midpoint slider. Don't do that. 0. I'm thinking, come on. I had a much better green than this is leading on to be here. So I was pulling this midpoint slider, not the other one. So I'm going to change it back to 1, which is its neutral point. And then grab my white point slider up here at the top and now start to pull that back. Much better. Okay, I was like, okay, I'm just going to look awful here. All right, so, okay, I've got 255. Recheck your first point. Everything looks good. Before you say okay to that, take a look around this. Look at the amazing mask that you're making on that hair. Use the preview button to go on and off to see, are you being too aggressive about that? I'm losing a little bit of the hair over here, but it's not the end of the world. I'm going to go ahead and say okay to that. I'm going to double-click the hand. Again, this was the thing that I was talking about. We only cared about that edge to actually build that edge. If you hit the B key to get a brush, make sure that it is a completely hard brush. Make sure that it's a normal blending mode, 100% opacity, 100% flow. Hit the D key to get your color, foreground and background colors to default to black and white. If black is your foreground color, hit the X key to make sure white is the foreground color. And we can simply then, on our mask, paint out the rest of this area that's not her figure. I'm going to get close to her feet, but not actually at her feet. That takes care of the whole rest of this part around like this. I'm not going to finish doing the pen tool. I would do the pen tool around her feet, but I'm simply going to load this guy as a selection. I'm going to then duplicate our smart object. I'm going to apply that selection to this second layer as a layer mask. It goes on there. I'm then going to select my original layer so that I can put a blank layer in between both of my smart objects. The blank layer goes in between. Since white is now my background color, I'm going to hold down Command and hit Delete. It fills that with my background with white.
Sorry, I'm a little behind.
That's okay.
So, okay, so I got all the areas knocked out similar to yours. I've got the selection that yet.
Okay, so then all I did, so then don't do anything. If you got a selection going,
yeah.
Add a blank layer on top of your original guy. Here, I'll go back with you. Hang on. Don't do a selection right now. Hit Command D to deselect. Just hit a blank layer on top of your smart object. Fill it with white. So to get white, again, hit the D key to default your colors to black and white. If white is your background color like it is mine, Command Delete will fill this with white. Are you good? Make a copy of your smart object. Drag it up on top of your white layer now. Go back over to your channels palette. Command click to load the knockout as a selection, and then simply add it as a layer mask up here onto this guy. My layer mask is inverted now, so Command I will actually invert it. And look at the quality of your knockout. You good? So look at the quality of this knockout. This is insane, right? So that's why you go through the hassle of doing all of this. Again, we know how to remove the spill. We don't need to go through that, right? You would have to rasterize this in. Well, let's just do it. We're here this far. You have to rasterize this image because you cannot do spill removal on a smart object. So make the smart object active. Come up to the layer menu, down to smart objects, and then down to rasterize. You lose the little icon there in the bottom, so it's no longer a smart object, which now will allow me to, again, use a B key for a brush, make it a much smaller brush, make sure that the brackets are around the image so that we are working on the image. Change your brush from hard to a soft brush. Change your blending mode from normal down to color. Hover over the color of her hair, and I would actually not pick something on this dark side that actually gets that doesn't really have a lot of color in it. I'm actually going to pick something more on the top of her head here. Hold down the Option key to sample that color, and then again make it a little bit larger brush and simply remove the color spill by painting over that part. And do the same thing actually on the other side. And you've got this remarkable, again, you do this for a client, you shoot it, and then you actually knock it out, and you have that kind of quality edge and that kind of feather, and people will just look at you dumbfounded and go, how I don't understand this. How can you do this? And you say, I learned well. Okay. Say what? Yeah, right. Okay, you can close this guy up. It's not part of your homework. You don't need to save it. What is not a part of your homework is the next file. This is going to be in your folder for this week. So this is week 8. Inside your folder, you should have a folder that says, it's called High Frequency Healing. And inside that folder, you will see 2 things. There's a PDF in here called The Ultimate Guide to Frequency Separation. This is pretty much the authority on it. I want you guys to do me a favor and please read this. It's especially the very beginning parts of it are very interesting. However, there's also something, and I'm opening mine up so that you can actually see it. There's something in here that you do also care about, and it's the recipe that you use. But again, it's a very interesting read to begin with, so you should actually go through and actually do this. But this is the recipe that I'm actually going to show you that we are going to follow in this. Now, I understand how frequency healing, separation healing works. What I don't understand is why they use a slightly different recipe for 8-bit and 16-bit. There's nothing, I understand the math behind this and what's going on here. And frankly, like I say, I'm just going to flat out admit to you, I don't know why they changed this for, there's a difference in 8-bit and 16-bit. If you run either one of these recipes on either an 8-bit or a 16-bit image, they both appear to work equally well. So, but at any rate, these people know more than I do, so I just do what they say. All right, so anyway, if you then will open the image that's inside that folder for me, it is a Photoshop file, and it should just be, it's not a smart object, it's just a background of this girl. And if we zoom in close to this girl, you will actually see that there are issues that we can actually try to resolve on her face. Now, in some of this, you could actually, again, do the tonal retouching that we did last week. However, How long did you guys work on the tonal retouching project? It takes forever, right? However, what was the quality of the work that you did? It's surreal, right? I mean, it's incredible, but it takes forever to do. So what I need to do is give you guys, remember we've talked about this before, there are things that you can do. So that would be the really high-end version of it. That is when you're getting paid a lot of money and you have the time to do it. There's the super low-end version of it where you whack the shit out of this with the healing brush tool and then you're just done. But the healing brush tool, the problem with the healing brush tool is that it destroys skin texture. That's one of our biggest problems. And to see what that's really like, just go ahead and really quickly make a copy of this file. And we're going to work on the copy of this. And let's say that we wanted to try to get rid of the hairs that are on the side of her face. So you would, again, come over to the tool palette that's down here. On our drop-down menu, come down to not spot healing brush, but to the healing brush tool. And then come over to this part of your image, make it a little bit larger. Now we can restrict certain things. So for instance, the hair here, we're only trying to make things darker in here to get rid of this hair. So I could use a blending mode of darken with my healing brush tool. Again, I've got to be doing this on a copy of my image. I can't be doing this on a blank layer because a blank layer has nothing to compare it to. So there is no lighter or darker in an empty layer here. But there is on a copy of this image like we've got going right here. I'm going to sample the outside of her hair out on the outside of her skin out here in this area. And then I'm going to come in and I'm going to try to fix this to blend this whole part in. And it looks like I am, what's going on here? I'm going to try that again. I'm going to go back in history. I've got a duplicate of my layer. Again, I'm going to sample out here now. And I'm going to come in. Well, it's actually a light skin tone that I'm actually sampling. But again, it just fucks up the skin texture here. That does not look like real skin texture here to me. So I'm going to Command Z to undo that. It's not the way to actually go about doing this. But again, if somebody gives you, okay, I'm going to give you $50 in an hour to retouch 8 of my pictures, you're not going to do that tonally. You're going to go in and say, you get what you pay for, right? But there's an in-between. And the in-between of this is frequency separation. So the first thing we need to do is think about and understand what frequency really is. So what we are specifically talking about is called spatial frequency. And what happens in spatial frequency is you can see in this girl, for instance, if you look at this area of her cheek right over here, you can see that there's actually very, very, very little detail in this area of her cheek over here. This area would be said to have very low spatial frequency. There is not a lot of changing in the frequency here. Pretty much all the coloring is the same, the tone is the same. So there is very little, this is what, again, this would be low spatial frequency. Where you get into high spatial frequency would be areas like you look at her lips, you look at the hair that's on her cheek, her eyes have massively high spatial frequency. There is an enormous amount of detail here. There's an enormous amount of shifting from one detail, from one type of detail to the next. This whole area right here would be considered to have high spatial frequency. Does that make sense what we're trying to do here? So in frequency separation work, what we need to try to do is separate these two so that we have got low spatial frequency on one layer and high spatial frequency on a separate layer. And what that's ultimately going to allow us to do is to retouch one without retouching the other. Does that make sense? Hope it'll make more sense when we get there. Okay, so in order to do that, make sure that you've only made a duplicate of this layer once. We're actually going to make a second copy of this layer. Oh, it does? Yeah, if you've already got low and high on those, go ahead and delete those both, please. I want you just to have the regular background layer. I'm going to do the same thing, so I start out with you guys. So you should only have the background layer. So I want you to make 2 copies of this layer. Sorry, make 2 copies of it. Simply drag the background layer down to the dog-eared once, then drag that copy down a second time. So I've got 3 copies of this guy. On the one that's in the middle, if you double-click on the name, we're going to rename it, and we're going to call this low. And then I need you to double click on the one that's on the top, and we're going to rename this high. Those are going to actually stand for low frequency and high frequency. Then I want you to turn off the eyeball on the high frequency one so that it's not turned on. Then I also want you to zoom into this girl's face enough that you can actually see kind of what it is that I am talking about. I am in at 100%. If you want to get into 100% quickly, you simply double click on the magnifying glass and it'll take you to 100%. But this gives me a good view of what I'm actually trying to see here. You can build an action that actually does this, but one of the problems that you get into this action is the amount of blurring that we're going to do right now. So if you know enough about action building, you can get an action that will create these two layers for you that'll actually do the naming, and then we'll actually pause and let you enter a value of blurring in here, and then go ahead and finish this up. It's a little more complex. If you guys really want to get into it, we can look at doing that maybe next week or the week after. But for the time being, that's what we're going to actually do, is we're going to leave it as this part right now. You need to run a blur on this thing. So I'm going to come up to the filter menu. Again, I'm working on the low layer right now. The low layer is active. The high layer is not active, and the eyeball is turned off. I'm going to come up to the to the filter menu, and I'm going to come down to blur, down to Gaussian Blur. And what you need to do now is you need to put in a value that actually blurs this image enough to get rid of the detail, the high spatial frequency detail that you want to get rid of. So for instance, I want to get rid of the hairs that are on the side of her cheek. I want to get rid of the pimples that are on the side of her face. I would like to get rid of this pimple down here. That may be a little ambitious with this, because at a certain point, this starts to become tonal, which again would be more low frequency. However, the other thing that you need to keep in mind when you're doing this, you need to work in multiples of 3 in your blurring. So you start out with 3 and you say to yourself, is this enough? I don't believe it is. So the next value you would put in would be 6. Again, multiples of 3. Do I feel like I got enough of this out? This may be enough. I'm not sure. What would be my next step of blurring that I would try? 9. So I'm going to try 9. You don't want to take this any further than you absolutely have to take it, but you need to go far enough. So I'm actually going to say 9 is doing the trick here. Now, what you are now looking at is the low frequency of this image. Remember, the high spatial frequency is where you're picking up all that detail. Well, look at it. You don't have any of that sparkly eye anymore. You've got the green of her eye, you've got tonal work in here, but you don't really have any of the details. The eyelashes, for the most part, are gone. The same thing, all the hairs on the side of her face are gone. All of these parts are gone. This is now considered, this would be the low spatial frequency of this image. Does that make sense, what's going on here? Okay, fine. So then say okay to that. Go back up to the high layer now, turn it on, and also turn on its eyeball so that you can actually see it. Now, this is the recipe that we are actually going to use. This is an 8-bit image. So if you look at this recipe, we have not, how many people in this room have ever worked with either apply image or calculations? Yeah, we will get into both of these by the end of this class. We get into calculations in a big way at the very end of this class. It's the most complex of what we will do in this class in dealing in Photoshop. So for right now, I'm not going to get into a huge explanation of what it is. I'm merely going to say it's a way to run mathematical calculations on channels and on layers. Ultimately, it ends up, you see it in layers, but really the math is being run on channels. So what we now have is this. We've got our low frequency, right? So what I'm going to now do is I'm going to subtract the low frequency from this high layer, and what I will be left with is the high frequency. Does that make sense? Okay, so this is actually how you do it. And again, you just follow this recipe right here. It's in that thing that I actually gave you, and I'm going to show you where it is right now. So you go back into Photoshop. You come up to the image menu down to apply image, and a dialog box will open up. And in this, so again, up to image, down to apply image, and a dialog box opens up. Does everybody have the apply image dialog box open? Okay, inside this dialog box, in this apply image box, you want to change this layer, not to merge, but you want to change it to low. That is the low frequency guide. You want to go ahead and leave the channel as RGB. You do not want to invert this. And then as far as the blending mode goes right here, you want to change this blending mode to subtract down here at the bottom. When you do that, a dialog box will open up, an extra one right here, and what you get in here is a scale and an offset. You need to set your scale at 2 and your offset to 128. And now what you will see, the result that we actually have here, that we are looking right here, is the high frequency part of this image. It's got no color to it, but it does have all the detail in it. Are you good on this?
The only difference I see is that
that's because you've got a scale of 1 and you've got an offset of 0. You've got to put in a scale of 2 and an offset of 128. So the one with blur, make the highlighter active. Now do that. Are you good at this?
We just left it later and it's still the contrast
So that's what we are doing now. Listen, everybody focus. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, you're right. Yeah. It might have a little bit of color in it, but it's not got a whole lot going on in it. So anyway, this is what you end up with. So what we did was we created a low spatial frequency version of this file. Now we're subtracting that low information from the high, or from the image, not from the high. We're subtracting the low information from a copy of this image, and what we're left with is the high frequency of this image. Does that make sense? So finally, say OK to this. Then we need to change the blending mode of this, and you need to change the blending mode of this to linear light. Yes? That's being blurred right now, so go ahead. Turn off the highlighter, turn off that. You've blurred both of these. Okay, so no, that's okay, that's okay. Let's just go back in. You don't have to go back in. Straight. Just throw your highlighter away. No, leave that guy. That one's fine. Throw the high one away. Perfect. Make a copy of the background one. Great. Drag it on top. All right. Rename it high. Perfect. And you're good right now. Fine. So then up to apply image. Good. And then that changes to low. Exactly. Set scale to 2. Offset to 128. And then change the blending mode of this from normal down to linear light. Okay. So guys, now what it looks like is that we've actually got a copy of it. Now our image does not look like it's actually changed. As a matter of fact, if you double click on the hand, we are going to put our high frequency work in its own group. So to put it in its own group, the top layer is actually active and selected right now. Simply hold down the Shift key and select both of them. So you've selected both the high and low layer. Come over to the drop-down menu on the side and come down and say you want to create a new group from layers. All we're going to do, a group is simply a folder that will hold these layers. So, and it's just a management thing. That's all it is. So if you say new group from layer, a dialog box will open, and I typically call mine split frequency. And say, okay. And now you'll see, if you click on the little drop-down guy, it's just that you've got both of those layers are sitting inside of here, and then you can collapse these things, which makes it just easier to work with. Once we've done our work on this guy, you can close it up, and you can keep going on, and it's a file management, a layer management deal. It doesn't do anything else. So at any rate, I'm going to zoom in and take a look at this, and what I want you to do, we're actually to zoom in and take a look at this as well. I'm going to come in pretty close again. I'm back in that 100%. You can see if you turn the eyeball of your split frequency off that you do not see a single change in this image, not one thing at all. However, you remember what that high layer looked like and what the low layer looked like. One was completely blurred and the other one's gray. However, combined together, they recreate the image. Does that make sense what's going on here? So finally, we actually need to use this thing. And I need to get my tablet plugged in because, again, this is serious tablet work. So we are going to start using the high frequency most. And I've got to be honest with you. Most people who do this kind of work do the majority of it in the high layer. That's usually where your problems are. The low layer, you can do some work, and you have to do some work in it. But the low layer can very quickly turn your image into a completely artificial fake. I can't believe how shitty and cheesy my image actually looks. So in order to change this, you need to select the high layer. We are going to be working on the high layer. So go ahead and make it active. As a matter of fact, if you turn off the other two eyeballs on this just to look at it, you can see what it is we're actually going to try to do. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to grab skin out here that exists, and I'm going to use the skin out here to replace this thing that's actually got the hair on it. However, do you see any transition of tone in this? Now, when you think about this girl's mouth, everybody look up at me really quick. Get this light on so you can sort of see me a little bit. When you think about, okay, look at my mouth right now. When you look at mine, even though I've got, you know, mustache or whatever this is. What you'll see on me is the fact that you know instinctively, you know this as well, that this part of my mouth up here, right in the center part, is actually closer to you. And then as you start to go along this line, this actually recedes back in space, right? And as does the whole rest of my face, right? And so in photographs, when that actually happens, that recession actually, the result of that is that the area that's here in the front is actually lighter, and as you start to recede back here, things start to get darker. And if you turn on all the lights on the other two the images, you can actually see that's happening right here. You see it's actually very light up here, but as we start to go in this direction, it actually starts to get darker. And then you can see the very same thing here as we're going from a lighter area here. As you start to move into her cheek, things start to get darker. However, if you turn off both of these guys, you don't see that happen anymore. This area over here, it's got less detail than this, but it is not anywhere darker at all. Does that make sense? Because again, that darkness is low spatial frequency. So if you turn off the high layer and turn on the low layer, you see the shift in tone happens on the low layer. This is the beauty of doing split frequency work, is that I can replace the texture of her skin and not worry about the contouring. The contouring remains because it's on the low layer. Does that make sense? Are we good on that? So this is how it ultimately works. Turn both the layers on, turn everybody's on now, make sure that the high layer is actively selected. The tool that most people use in this work is actually the patch tool. So if you come over to the healing brush tool menu, it's not the spot healing brush, it's not the healing brush itself, it's actually the patch tool. This is the one, this is one of the two that we mostly use. So in the patch tool, what ends up happening is you actually select the area that you're having a problem with, and you drag it to the area that you want to use as the fix. So unlike the other tools, you're not selecting source first and going to destination, it's just the opposite. So I'm gonna start with this little area of hair that's right underneath her nostril right here, and I'm gonna simply circle it using the patch tool. And then again, you can see that there's darkness in here, whatever. I'm gonna simply drag this over here to area of skin and let go. That is actually replace the hair, Command D to deselect. And what you will actually see us happen now is you have removed the hair, however, you replaced the skin that was there with skin tone. There's still pores in that, there's still, this is believable skin tone. This is not what the fucking healing brush will do by destroying the texture of your image. You have actually taken texture and replaced texture with it. But look at the shadow that's under her nose. You did not change that one iota because the shadow that's underneath her nose is low frequency. Is this making sense to you guys? Who's lost? Are we good on this? All right, so we can actually keep continuing to do this to get rid of the rest of her hair. Some people would be tempted to select this whole big thing. I would not actually work that way. But what I do typically do is I'll work in, for instance, I wouldn't do half a section like this and try and do it because you'll see where these two join together. However, I also don't want to select the entire thing like this. So what I typically will do is I'll actually just select this guy, but I'll do the whole thing and then drag out to here and drop that in. Command D to deselect, and then go after this last guy right down here. Command D to deselect. And you can see exactly what I've got going here. I'm keeping the contouring of her face. I do have a little bit of repeat pattern in here. You can see it right here, depending on where you actually selected. So you can get rid of that repeat pattern. It's happening right here and here. So I'm going to select this guy right here and change the repeat pattern like that. And that actually takes care of this. As far as the guy that's going right here, my wife used to call these monkey lines. So I don't know that that's really an appropriate term, but anyway, that's what she would call them. I'm going to see what this is, so I'm going to simply select this guy right here, and I'm going to drag it just to the left and see what that did. Again, it got rid of the line, but I've got a repeat pattern right here on that little dot. So I'm going to select it. So I get rid of, so I don't have two of everything that are sitting right next to each other. And that gets rid of that. If you want to now see what this actually did, you can simply use the eyeball for the split frequency layer. You got to make sure your background layer is turned on. And you can turn it off, and you can actually see what's happening here. We're going to go over to this other spot on this other side of her face. It's sort of a blemish, kind of something right here. It's on the other side of her nose, on this side right over here. I'm going to go after the same thing here. I'm going to actually circle this guy, and I'm going to drop this off and then click out of it. You will still see, in most cases, though, there's still a shadow around this. That I didn't completely get rid of that. And what I'm not getting rid of is actually low-frequency information. I got rid of the spot itself, the actual pimple guy itself, but what I didn't get rid of is actually the low frequency tonality underneath it. To get rid of that, you drop down to the low layer and you do the exact same move again. And now Command D to deselect, and now you have replaced not only the high frequency separation information, but you did the low frequency part as well. Is this working for you guys? Is this not working for any of you guys? Are we good on this? Okay, finally, well, let's look at something else we can actually do. This will be the mistake. I'm going to show you the error that a lot of people make. So a lot of people will actually look at this area up here of her face and say, well, I would love to get rid of these pores up here. You can go back to your high frequency layer to try and do this. And again, you can actually select a big area like this and pull it up over here. This is skin over here that's actually out of focus. That's why it's got no texture to it. And let go, hit Command D to deselect. And you can see it's pretty much, it just blows everything out. Not really something that I would actually suggest of doing. So I'm going to undo that. Again, you would probably go after this in various different ways, trying to get rid of some of these pores. Again, if this is a quick, down and dirty job and they're not paying you a whole lot of money, then I would absolutely go after it this way, and I would get rid of all those pores. Or I would tell the client, those pores just look beautiful, don't you think? The last thing that I want to talk about right here, and you can sort of see it on the left side of her nose right here. You can sort of see this area right here. You can see that there's actually a blotchiness to her skin. Now, there's a couple of wrinkles. There's a little pimple right here. There's a couple of these little white dots, whatever. Again, you would get rid of those guys using the split frequency work on your high layers. So again, I'll just get rid of a couple of them really quick. I'm on my high layer, so I'm simply going to circle this guy right here and get rid of him. I'm going to get rid of this guy. I'll get rid of that guy. I'll get rid of this guy. I might actually get rid of all the that part together right there. And that's sort of my before and after. This is now the work that I've done in that area. Just sort of cleans it up. But I've got a serious shift in tonality right here. And when you guys were working, doing your tonal retouching, did it start to make sense when you went to the larger areas of tonal work, what you were trying to do? Again, you were trying to smooth out bigger areas of the blotchiness of the skin. That's what we were trying to get rid of, right? Well, there's a way you can do that in split frequency work as well. And so what you would do there, this is low frequency work. Again, if you turn off the high layer, you can see it right here. You can see that there's a blotchiness right here. This is different skin tone than right next to it. There's an area in here that is just not the same. You can actually watch this happen in real time. Don't do this, just watch my screen. I'll show it to you what mine looks like. You can actually select this area right here. And again, come down in here to blend it. And you can just see now that that guy's actually gone. That whole, the darkness that's actually in there, that part's actually gone. I'm gonna go back in space so that I don't have that, so you can see this in real time. And now you can actually do this with me. Again, you're now working on the low layer, not the high layer, and you're simply dragging this over to blend that out. Command D to deselect. And now when you turn your split frequency guy on and off, you can see that you've actually blended that out. The tonal stuff there is now actually smoother. So that's one way of actually doing that. If you've done this, do me a favor, go back in history, 2 steps to undo that. Command D to deselect. There's another way of going about doing this, and this is the way you'll see a lot of retouchers do this. This is really the hack method, but I just want to show it to you so you know what's going on here. So another option that we've got in this is when you think about skin tone that's actually being like this, we're trying to get it all to essentially be the same one color, right? Well, what does blurring do in an image? Makes everything all one color if you hit it hard enough, right? So that's what we're going to actually do on this area. However, to do this, you need to hit the L key to get a lasso tool. You need to feather your lassoing. So right now, if I were to select a lasso and come up and I were to actually blur it, I'd have an extremely hard edge and you would spot it. You do not want to do that. I'm going to hit Command D to deselect. You need to change your feathering and you need to really crank it up. I'm going to take my feathering up to like 20 pixels. Now what you'll actually see, well here, this is the difference. Let's actually put a layer just on top of our split frequency guy and go ahead, just a blank layer on top, and then just draw a line out with a 20, I've got a feather of 20 in here. I'm gonna hit the D key to get my background colors to default to black and white, and I'm gonna fill this selection that I just made with black. And you can see what I'm actually talking about. We're making, that feathering is creating this incredibly soft edge. Does that make sense what's going on here? So just so you know what's happening with the feathering, you can go ahead and throw that layer away if you've done it. Now go back to your low frequency layer. Make sure that the low one is the one that is selected. And I'm going to come over to this very same area right here, and I'm actually going to select it. I've got a huge feather on here. And then I'm going to come up and blur this. I'm going to come up to the filter menu, down to blur, down to Gaussian Blur. And you usually have to smack this pretty hard. You usually have to bring this up. Sometimes it'll come up. What you can see right now, I'm up in roughly the 40s, and you can see what's actually happening here. I'm keeping all of the detail because the detail is sitting up on my high layer. But in my low layer, I'm actually blurring this. And if you actually turn this guy on and off, you can see that indeed exactly what I was hoping to happen is happening. It's smoothing out that skin tone. It's taking out that shadow. Does that make sense what's going on here? So in a lot of cases, you would then say okay to this. Now, if you have gone too far, because what a lot of people will do is, because they want to do this work really fast. So I'm showing you how to do this really fast. They will leave their blur up at a high level like this. They won't bother to change that blur all the time. As a matter of fact, hit Command Z to undo this, just to so, because I'm going to do a more extreme version of this. So Command Z to undo that. Let's go back up to the blur menu again, up to the filter menu, down to blur, down to Gaussian Blur, and really whack this. Hit it up like around a 60 or 65, something like that, which some people would say, oh, that looks great. Other people would argue that we've gone too far. But here's the trick. If you leave your blur value really high and you never bother to change it, then you can go in and fine tune it for everything that you're doing. So go ahead and say okay to this. And then immediately, and it has to happen right now. You cannot go a step further. It can only happen right now. But right now, if you come up to the edit menu, you can come down to fade. And whatever your last move that you made will actually exist in this menu. So for instance, if we just did an unsharp mask, and we didn't do anything else and came to this menu, it would have fade, unsharp, mask. But in our case, it's going to be fade, Gaussian blur, because that's the last thing we did. A menu will come up that allows you to then drag the blur that we just did down to nothing. If you come all the way back down to 0, it's essentially an undo. So then what happens now is you can actually control, you can actually see this, pulling this blur back in real time. How much of it do you really want and how much of it do you really not want? So then I'm going to say, yep, 60% sounds good to me, and I'm going to say okay to that. And then people will just bang through this. They'll come over here and they'll select another area like this, up to the filter menu, Gaussian blur, and immediately to fade Gaussian blur and pull this back to an area that is working for them and is sort of believable and okay. And they'll just keep blowing through the image really quick. There's a lot of down here, there's a lot of variation in skin tone right here. So again, up to the filter menu, down to blur. Again, I'm pulling in, you see what happened right here? That blur actually pulled in dark color from down here that I don't want. So again, it was too strong, up to the fade, blur, crank this back down to actually open that part back up and still be okay. Are there questions about this?
So you would say this is like a down.
This is the down and dirty quick technique. And what I will also say to you is stay away from that low layer. You're going to be tempted to go after that fucker to smooth out all this skin. And what ends up happening is that she'll end up losing all the dimension in her face. She won't have any at all. She'll look like Plastic Girl. But this is a way to deal with, especially that little feathery hair on people's mustaches, that kind of stuff. Oh my God. Well, you just see how quickly we just took care of that. And is that still believable? It sure is believable to me. You try to do that with a healing brush tool, or God forbid, the clone stamp tool, you'll be in there forever. Okay, are there questions about this? Okay. In our order of retouching, remember we did our order of retouching last week, right? Our first thing is what kind of work? Pixel work is your first. This is pixel work. You would be doing this before you would do any tonal work, and you'd be doing this before you do any color work, before you do any liquify work, before you do any of those transforming work. All of this would happen. This all happens in the beginning stages. Are we good on this? Okay, how quick do you think we can do tips? Okay. Quick. I've got to try to get this to you guys really fast as I can. You can actually close that up. You do not need to save it. It's not part of your homework. You've got one last file that you've got to open really quickly, and it's this Sunburn Terry Richardson file. And if you open this up, is this a surprise that this is a Terry Richardson photograph? No, not to anybody. So Terry Richardson goes into a bar and meets Donald Trump. No, anyway. Did I? What? Anyway, I keep opening. Oh, God, I'm trying to do this so fast, I'm going to screw this up. It doesn't matter. Okay, so we need to get rid of the sunburn. So I would ask all of you how to get rid of the sunburn, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to show you how to do this really quick, or as fast as I can. So this is the way we get rid of the sunburn, the way we think to get rid of the sunburn. When I look at this, what I've actually got here is I've got skin that's wrong, but I've got skin that's correct, right? So my goal, the solution to getting rid of the sunburn, is if I can make the sunburn the same color as the rest of her, this part of her right here, then I get rid of the sunburn. Does that make sense? It's that simple. So this doesn't just involve getting rid of sunburn. If you want to go in and you've got two people who have very different skin tones, or let's say you're doing a composite of the same person, one's got a radically different skin tone or even a slightly different skin tone than the other, how do you get them all to match? This is how you get them all to match. Your first move is to copy this layer, because we actually have to blur it. If you really zoom in close and you look at this skin, you'll actually see there's a blotchiness in this. There's areas that are lighter, areas that are darker. That's not going to work well for us in trying to figure out the numbers that we need to actually change this. So your first move is to actually blur the copy. So I made a copy of this up to the filter menu, down to blur. Gaussian blur, you do not need to hit this with a 65 Gaussian blur. I'm going to say like a 3 is probably plenty on this. Again, you're trying to get just blocks of solid color, and go ahead and say okay to that. I'm going to double click on the hand to kick back out. Now, in my experience, the easy way to do this is that you want to pick the problem area first. You'll see why that is right now. So the problem area first is the sunburn. So we are going to go to our eyedroppers. So click on the eyedropper tool, and you're picking the color sampler tool, just like we do when we're trying to make our masks. And you want to come over and you want to find the area that is the most egregious of the sunburn. You do not want to pick, so for instance, she's got sunburn up here on the top of her chest, but that's much lighter than this area down here. What we want to do is pick the area that's absolutely the worst. And I've got a spot right here that looks like it's the reddest of red. So I'm going to drop a color sampler point right there. I end up getting a readout of 242, 168, 164. If you're doing this with me, you should be close. The next thing I do is I want to figure out, I want to pick a color that it's actually going to be that I want to replace it with. Now, you could say, well, her arm will be a color that you could actually replace it with. I would argue that her arm is not a color to replace it with, because I would think that her arm, in all likelihood, could actually be, she could have a farmer tan, she could have, Lord knows what could be going on her arm. What's a more than likely suspect that would be the color of this top part of her boob is actually this area of her body right down here. I'm going to avoid the highlight area that's in the middle, and I'm going to go after something down here that's actually got a little bit of color to it. So these are my 2 points right here. And again, just look up at my screen so you can sort of see where I'm at. And so here's the deal. I've actually got 2 sets of color points up here. The first one is my problem one. The second one is the solution. If I can get this top one to be the same color as the bottom one down here, I can eliminate the sunburn, right? So to do that, we are going to then put a curve on top of this guy. So simply add a curve up under the top. And again, I'm going to use the targeting adjustment tool to actually do this. You'll see when the curve came up on top of this that we now have 2 sets of readouts for these points. The 2 sets of readouts are before and after readings. The reading on the left is before the curve does anything. The reading on the right is when the curve actually does something. Now, we haven't changed the curve, so the numbers on the right haven't changed at all, but they will when we actually change this. But this is the reason I do them in the order that I'm actually doing them here. What I'm trying to do is, did I actually do this in the wrong order? No, I didn't. I did this in the right order. What I'm trying to do is this. You see the after points of number 1, this 242, 168, 164. I want them to match the before points of my number 2 point right down here. So I'm trying to get this 242 to be 233. I'm trying to get the 168 to be 196 and the 164 to be 178. Does that make sense to you guys? Does that not make sense to anybody? Again, these points right here are my problem. I'm trying to get the after values of my curve on the problem area to equal the before values of my better point. So to do that, you simply go to the red channel first, click on your drop-down menu, come to the red channel. You actually then click on the targeting adjustment tool that will set the point in the proper place on the curve for you. You come down to this number 1 point and you click and you start to drag down till that red reads 233. You can also use your arrow keys to actually dial it in. So now it's exactly what I said I wanted to do. This 233, the after value of my point number 1, 233 is equaling the before point of my 233 right here. Again, this number 0.2 point right here is the good one. So then I'm simply going to go to the green channel, using the targeting adjustment tool, do the same thing. That 167 needs to go up to read 196. So again, the after number here, the after number in the problem area is equaling the before number of my area right here. And then finally, the last one, the blue one, actually click on this guy, and the 164 needs to become 178. So now I've got it exactly the way I want it. The after numbers of my sunburned area right here, this part right here, are matching the before numbers. Now, we've changed everything on this image. Don't get me wrong. The after numbers of my number 2 down here have changed as well, but I'm going to fix that in just a second. So has everybody got this happening where these before and after numbers are exactly the same? Are we good? Yeah? You're not looking like you're quite there, Tig, but that's only from my angle. Maybe you are. Okay, so the curve is correct. You now need to fill this curve with black. You can simply invert it. So the mask on the curve is active. Simply hit Command-I, and it gets rid of it. You can also throw away the blurred copy of this girl. You don't need that anymore. And finally, you hit the B key to get a brush. You make sure that this is a soft brush. we're not going to brush this in one fell swoop. We're actually going to drop the opacity of our brush down to like a 30% so that we can do this slowly. White is my foreground color, which will reveal that curve change if I work on this mask. And then you simply start to paint over this girl. And we're starting out, and you can see that it took some of the sunburn away. It actually did a pretty good job on the top. I'm going to hit this now a second time on the top. It actually got rid of the sunburn completely on the top. It still hasn't gotten rid of the area on the very top of her boobs quite yet. So I'm going to run my cursor over that just a couple of more times to actually open that up. I'm feeling a little bad about this area right here. It looks like I've put a little too much green in that. So I'm actually going to narrow my brush down a little bit. I'm going to hit the X key to paint with black to remove just a little bit of what was going on in there. And this is now my before and after, and you can actually see that I've removed the sunburn. Now, I still have a tonal issue that's happening in this, that I actually should probably get this area lighter. Again, how would you do that? How would you go after this to make that area lighter? It's the last thing we're going to look at. And you guys need to remind me, I'm going to show you another way to do this next week, but this is what I would do to actually make that area lighter. I'm going to come over to my layers palette. I'm going to hold down the option key. I'm going to actually click on a layer to bring up the new layer dialog box. I'm going to call this tonal retouching large. I'm going to use its drop-down menu to come down to soft light. I'm going to click on fill with soft light with neutral color. I'm going to say OK to that. And then I'm going to click on my foreground color and sample her skin tone. I've sampled the skin tone right now. I'm going to lower, I'm going to get rid of the saturation, and I'm also going to make it a little bit brighter. I'm just making a dodging color. That's all I'm making here. I'm going to say OK to that. I've got a relatively good sized brush. I'm going to make it a little bit larger. I'm going to drop my opacity down to like 5%. And I'm going to come over here to the area that's a little bit darker, and guess what I'm going to do? Tap, 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 tap. It's not going fast enough for me, so I'm actually going to take my opacity up to 10%. And that doesn't seem to be doing a thing for me. Oh, because I've got my blending mode is still on color. Change my blending mode back up to normal for your brush. 10% actually may be too much now. Can you hear my tapping? And this is now what I'm actually doing. And you can see that's how you get rid of sunburn. Hallelujah! Okay. Damn. If it was 4 minutes left, I would show you one other thing, but I've only got 2 minutes left and we got to get out of here. So has everybody dropped their homework? Are there any questions about this? I usually try to have this image up, and maybe we'll do this. There's open houses next week. So what I always try to do is whenever open house is, I try to get this image up on the screen for us all to be working on it, because every little 18-year-old kid comes walking in here and sees this and goes, I want to go to school there. And so if we're in the middle of talking about something completely different and a group comes in next week, just know I'm going to stop immediately. We're opening up the picture of boobs here, and we're actually going to retouch it a different way to get rid of the red. Are we good on this? All right, guys, I'll see you next week.
And then we don't need to save this.
You do not need to save this. And I'll go back to the other screen and show you what homework has actually been dropped. Oh, wait, really quickly. Did you guys do a sign-in sheet? Did we do, make sure it goes to Rebecca and then comes up to Tyken and Peyton. Does anybody see the remote control? Oh, here it is. Hello. No, you didn't. It's good. I don't know. Look at the middle set really quick and I'll tell you. I don't know that there is one for this week. Oh, wait a minute. I know there is one for this week. I'm sure there is. Take a look. I'm sorry, Savannah. I really don't remember. Okay, so this is what I have so far for this week. It is right here. Okay, thanks. Guys, I promise you I will be caught up on assignment grading next week, and we will actually look over some of the stuff. Some of it is pretty self-evident, I think pretty much so, but we will talk about specifically path work, a couple of other images that we need to sort of address, and there you go. If it is, it means you've actually got a shooting assignment as well then.
Yeah, like the whole thing.
Right, and the lighting diagram is due, so yeah.
So wait,
It's not for you guys. She's talking about digital teching.
I was like, whoa.
The chroma key, I think, isn't the date on it 2 weeks from now? Oh, that's right. We haven't done that. Okay, wait. So here, really quick. I will do that for you right now. Yeah, that's great. You can just pick your own.
In each group.
Do me a favor. Don't do more than 5 in a group. Otherwise, nobody learns it. So really, 3 or 4 in a group is the best. So if you guys want to do it right now, or I can do it for you. But if you want to get together in your own groups, that's fine. You just do it.
We got our group.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are you guys good on that on this side of the room over here? Good. Are we good on this? Picking groups, guys? Hey, before everybody leaves, wait, because I need to make sure everybody in this room is getting into a group. And if everybody just walks out of here, that's not going to happen. So when are you guys shooting and how big's your group?
It's
Okay, so it's the 4 of you, you're too big. Okay, so then you guys over there, are you thinking about a group? It's you 4 over there. So it's looking like you 4 there, and it looks like Andrew and Rebecca, you guys can jump into any group that you want. So when are you guys doing yours?
we have to discuss that.
Yeah, we have to have a group.
Okay. Yeah, it looks like everybody's figuring it out.